What's up, everyone? With the release of The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It, that means we now have 8 movies in the Conjuring franchise, so that means it's time to rank them. Real quick, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like and subscribe, and be sure to share your ranking of all 8 movies down in the comments below. And remember that my list isn't the right list, it's just my opinion. No one's lists are going to be the same, so just keep that in mind. Anyways, let's get into the ranking. So coming in last place for me is going to be the original Annabelle from 2014. This movie for me has always been like super bland and really just forgettable and boring. The plot of this movie is very generic, and it's really hard to believe what they did with this movie and that was the best they could come up with for the second movie in this franchise. It's incredibly disappointing what they did here. It does have some decent scares in this movie, just a lot of them are very just cheap and like not creative. It feels like they just scare you because they have to scare you, because that's kind of what a movie in this franchise would have to do. It's very uncreative. It's just a very bland take on the Annabelle doll, and it really baffles me. The story is just really bad. I think in this movie, this is a really hard movie to watch for me. And this is a franchise where I think the bottom movies are not good. Unlike the Saw franchise, which I previously ranked, I do not have fun watching this movie. I dread having to watch it. I dreaded having to watch it to rank this franchise. I don't enjoy it. It's it's not the worst movie ever made, but it's just it's not fun to watch, I don't think. So anyways, coming in at last place is going to be Annabelle, and a very disappointing movie. So coming in 7th place for me is going to be The Curse of La Llorona. For me, this movie, similar to Annabelle, has always felt extremely bland and very forgettable. I don't think this one's quite as boring as Annabelle. I do have a decent time watching it. There's a lot of really good scares in this movie, and like the La Llorona figure, the girl in the dress, I think she's pretty scary as kind of just like the figure in the movie. And overall, for the most part, I think this movie has a lot of fair scares in the movie, but really the entire premise and plot of this movie has just felt very cheaply crafted and very uninspired. It just doesn't feel like they really cared about this movie, and it feels very bland to me. And that's really a theme with these bottom 3 movies. They're all very bland and forgettable, I think. I do think this one is a significant step above Annabelle, where I do like the cast in this movie, and like I said, it does have some pretty good jump scares, but nonetheless, it does come here in number 7. So coming in at number 6 for me, and slightly above The Curse of La Llorona, is going to be The Nun. For me, similar to La Llorona and Annabelle, this movie is very bland and very forgettable and boring. That's a very, very much a theme through these 3 movies. And also, I think this movie, until the most recent movie, was the least scary in the franchise, while The Nun itself is very scary. I just don't think there's a lot of good scares within this movie. Really, you sign up for these movies for good jump scares. That's why a lot of people do enjoy them and go see them in theaters. I don't think this one really delivered on that. I know a lot of people hate this movie. For me, I've always liked it a little more than the previous 2 because I think the plot is pretty solid. I enjoyed enough, and it's intriguing enough to get me through the movie at least. And I think it's a significant step above the previous 2 movies when it comes to the plot. I also like the cast in this movie, and I think they're really, the acting is really good, and that's pretty consistent through all the Conjuring movies. Is the acting is fairly good, and that's definitely a nod to the franchise, but nonetheless, I do think this movie does have all the classic Conjuring issues. Bland plot, being boring, cheap jump scares. And also, I do want to point this out, all 3 of these bottom movies have the classic issue of they introduce you to these characters with no development, and they just expect you to care about them. There's little to no development within these 3 movies of the main characters, and that's really unfortunate, because that's something that The Conjuring, the original from 2013, did so well, is it actually developed the characters and made you care about the characters, not only the Warrens, but the family at the house. These movies don't do that at all, and that's super unfortunate because, like I said, The Conjuring did that so well. But nonetheless, The Nun comes in here at number 6. So coming in at number 5 for me is going to be Annabelle Comes Home. This movie for me has always just been like a popcorn horror movie. The plot is super simple, with essentially these 2 girls have to go babysit the Warren's daughter, and essentially a house of horrors gets unleashed when Annabelle's cage gets open. That's really the plot. It's super simple. It's by far like the smallest idea of the franchise, in a franchise that really does have these big horror ideas. This movie doesn't. It's just, once again, a small little story in a house. That's very simple. Once again, I think this movie is really safe. I think honestly it just works for me as just a fun, popcorn horror movie. Like I said, there's some really good scares in here, and for the most part, I actually care about the characters in this movie. I'm actually rooting for them to survive, unlike the previous 3. This movie really, I think, just gives the audience a good time, and on that alone, it delivers for me. While it's definitely one of the ones I rewatched the least, and definitely one of the least interesting in the franchise. I think at the very least there are some good scares in here, and it is pretty entertaining. So for me, it's a fairly successful entry in the franchise and significantly better than the previous three. So coming in at number 4 for me, and the newest entry in the franchise, is going to be The Conjuring, The Devil Made Me Do It. I really like the plot of this movie with, what if the devil made someone kill someone, or what if a demon made someone kill someone. I like that concept a lot. It's not as explored as much in this movie as you may have hoped, but I really like the premise of this movie. This movie also has the Warrens in here, who obviously are just great as always in this movie. I like their plot in this movie, and that alone gets you through the movie, I think. I find this movie fairly entertaining. I find it very easy to watch, which is a huge nod to this franchise, when I do think this franchise struggles with movies being boring and movies being hard to watch. This movie, I had no problem getting through all hour and 50 minutes of it. I thought it was a pretty successful entry in the franchise. I know a lot of people did not like it. I completely get that. I understand it was probably the least scary movie in the franchise. I completely agree with you. I found this movie to be pretty tame when it came to the jump scares. It just wasn't that scary of a Conjuring movie, I think. And I think the movie's a little ridiculous at times towards the end, but nonetheless, I think it was a pretty fun movie, and I was pretty happy with it. It's not perfect, but I definitely had a good time with it. So it comes in here at number 4. So coming in at number 3 is going to be Annabelle Creation, the best Annabelle movie and possibly the scariest movie in the franchise. I don't think it gets enough credit for that, but this movie is absolutely terrifying with relentless jump scares, and I think David Sandberg does a really good job with that. Well, the scares aren't as clever as the scares in The Conjuring, but there's just a ton of them, and this movie is just terrifying to watch, and it really holds that momentum throughout the entire movie. So that alone also makes this movie very entertaining, as it flies by once at the end, because it just doesn't let up. And I really think this movie's very entertaining. I care about the characters. The plot is pretty solid. It's not amazing, but it's pretty solid. And as a ghost movie, I think this movie really works. Comparing it to The Conjurings, the first 2 Conjurings, a lot of people are going to say this movie's not good, but on its own, it works a lot for me. I really have a good time watching it. Of all the Conjuring movies that have been made since the original from 2013, I think by far David Sandberg is the only one to come close to recreating the magic that James Wan did with the first 2 movies. So a huge nod to him. I just think this is a very entertaining movie with lots of great jump scares and just a really solid horror movie. So coming in second place for me is going to be the original Conjuring from 2013, directed by James Wan. Obviously, this movie is iconic. The scares are absolutely terrifying, and it really redefined the genre of supernatural horror movies. The plot is really strong here, as it follows, the family in Connecticut, I believe, as they're getting haunted by a ghost in this really creepy house. Like I said, the jump scares are really clever. James Wan really proves how good of a horror director he can be. Obviously he started with Saw, but he's evolved so much beyond that to just making one of the scariest movies ever made. Possibly, when it comes to ghost movies, the scariest movie ever made. The characters are really in depth, and that's a huge nod to this movie, because that just makes you really care about the characters. You're rooting for them throughout the entire film, and you just really want them to survive. And this movie is just terrific from start to finish. It doesn't overstay its welcome. It's just under 2 hours. It's really entertaining. It's super easy to watch. It's a phenomenal horror movie, one of the best ever. There's a reason this movie is so iconic, and really it redefined the genre. James Wan is such an excellent horror director, and for me, this movie comes in just a touch behind my number 1, but this movie for me is just a perfect horror film. So coming in at number 1 for me is going to be Conjuring 2. I know a lot of people prefer The Conjuring over The Conjuring 2. For me, I've always preferred this movie a little more. I really like the plot in England, where you have the Warrens who have to go all the way over to England to help this family who's being attacked by a demon. I really like that plot. I like the plot about people not believing in her. There's just a lot to this movie. I do think it's a little long, but nonetheless, there's just a lot going on in here with a lot of different themes that are touched on, a lot of different emotions are touched on in this film. I just think James Wan really takes everything and he succeeds with it, because I think this movie, like a good sequel, is bigger than the original. There's more ghosts. Literally, there's like 3 in this movie. There's more characters. It's longer. The plot is a bigger scale, and it's more, in my opinion, it's more terrifying, especially with the introduction of the nun, especially that scene about halfway through with Lorraine Warren when she looks down the hall and the nun's there. That still gives me chills just thinking about that scene. But I really love this movie. For me, everything that this franchise has done well, this movie does it the best, whether that be the scares, the plot, the character development. The plot is super fleshed out, and James Wan, I think this is probably my favorite movie from him. He does a great job at making you care about these characters, and you really are rooting for the characters by the end of the movie, because he develops the little girl's emotions in the movie, and he really makes you care about her, and really makes you want to root for her, and makes you want her to survive in the end. And there's a lot of emotion in this movie as well. It's really this and the first two are the only movies that actually hold emotion. And overall, for me, this movie is just perfect, super scary, the plot's amazing, and for me, it's just one of the best horror movies ever made and one of my personal favorites. And that's going to do it for my ranking of all 8 Conjuring movies. I think this is a really interesting franchise, a lot of hits and a lot of misses. But nonetheless, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe, and be sure to share your list down below. I'm definitely interested to see how people rank these movies, especially with the new one. I know the new one's very controversial. A lot of people like it, a lot of people don't. So I'm really excited to see where people are going to rank it within this franchise, once again, which is already a very mixed franchise. For the most part, I do like this franchise. I have fun with 5 out of the 8 of the movies. The bottom 3 for me are really hard to get through. But nonetheless, that's going to do it for the video. Thank you so much for watching as always, and have a great day.